Many of us like to think that public education is a warm and fuzzy enterprise where we put our children every day to learn all that they can, where they are cared for, nurtured, and helped to be their best. But what if that wasn't true? What if schools and public education were actually violence? We're going to talk about it today on Freedom Friday. This is Freedom Friday, and you're still not free. Welcome, friends and fam. It is another Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after an hour with Sharif El Mekki and me, Sharif. Good morning, brother. How you doing?
Good, man. Good morning. Happy Friday to you. Happy almost end of June. The year is halfway over. I don't know if I would celebrate or like get sad about or whatever, but man, time is flying.
You know
It's,
what?
it's different in adulthood. As a
I
kid, it
was
seemed
about
like
to
the year
say.
took a really long time. It was like, like now it's like, man, this is nuts.
I figured out what part of that is, and it's that once you become, now you may have never had this problem, but once you become Santa Claus, the year the year goes by fast.
Got it.
When you were waiting for Santa Claus every year, it's like,
It
God, it
takes
seems like
forever.
forever for Christmas to come around, every year. When you become Santa Claus, you're like, damn, it's Christmas again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How about that? How about that?
And then
So
everything
that's
else, the 4th of July and Father's Day, and it
mhm.
just seems like one after the other.
Birthdays, everything, right?
Where are you in the world?
In California, Los
Wow.
Angeles. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Had a opportunity to be on a panel talking about teacher diversity, representation, uh, hashtag we need black teachers. All the good stuff,
All the things.
all the things, all
We
the
need to
things.
rebuild Black educational capital. That is all the things. And you're always
That's
doing the essential part of that work. So I appreciate it, man. You are like,
no, my
uh,
my
uh, what you leaning for?
So sorry, battery about to die. I'm like, oh no, we about to end this show early. Shoot. Sorry about that.
Uh,
Yeah, man, it's still crazy. Like, for a minute I was not going not for a minute, for a while, I was thinking I was not going to leave my school. Even though I
mhm, mhm.
realized that this was going to take full blown effort. It was going to be need to be a full team's brains and strategy and response. And I still thought like, well, maybe I could do it nights and weekends. Maybe I could. Now I look back, I'm like, what were you thinking? And all the people who were telling me, be confident, don't be nervous, walk with faith, including you, right? You were one of the
Mhm.
few people I reached out with, like, hey, it's a great opportunity. I really can't stop thinking about it. What should I do? And so I just, I was thinking yesterday, just really, grateful for people like you who have been in different spaces, seen so many different things, in your life, that you're able to kind of give guidance and wisdom and support. And I think people just underestimate how important counsel is,
Mhm, mhm.
for small things, let alone like huge things, like this, like a transition, particularly with somebody like me who's only did one thing in my adult life. I did one thing. I was in schools, working directly in classrooms, in hallways, in the community, and this is a totally different space. So just just really appreciative.
Well, it's amazing how much of that I had to learn over time, something that I always heard but didn't believe, which is how interconnected we are.
Mm,
And because I have, like many people, the terminal disease of individualism, American rugged individualism in my mindset, my mind, it's
mm,
like one of my most challenging myths in my mind. It was always hard to get there with people who had Eastern religion or had some way of seeing the world that said, no, we're all interconnected, and
right.
oppression of you is oppression of me or whatnot. It always made sense, but the way that it became true for me and material was everything that I I have right now is by meeting people like you and then building relationships over time and the interchange of those relationships. I mean, like you offer so much in terms of, I'll say, like today's show to you. Hey, man, I have a loose idea about a show. What if education were violence? Do you have any do you have any plot points for that or any, and you'll be like, yep, I do. you know
Yeah.
so we are so much smarter as individuals for not being fully individuals, for being connected with a network of people who all have part of the gumbo.
Mhm.
Hey, y'all, I'm trying to make a gumbo. Well, somebody's got the sausage,
Yeah.
somebody's got the vegetables and whatever. And then when it comes to what you just said, transitions in life, I'm hoping when people watch this and see this that we are open in ways as Black men and as people of color within a field, that we're open about these things because someone somewhere is about to make a transition.
Mhm.
Someone somewhere is thinking
Yeah.
clearly about, like, I'm the only one who has to make a decision like this right now, or at the end of their rope with their
Mhm.
employer, or here's my favorite one, soul searching around, is my work meaningful?
Mhm.
Like, I've been doing this for like 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and is this my calling? Is this the
Mhm.
thing I was put here to do? That's a tough question to answer by yourself. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so people watching, reach out to us too. We're here for you. We're not just here for each other, but we're here for all of you.
Yeah.
um
Who was that?
so
I think it was Mark Twain. It may have been somebody else, but it was like, there's two lives or 2 point. You're born twice or something
mhm,
like that.
mhm,
The
mhm,
first time, basically, the first time you're born, like when you're born, and then when you figure out why.
mhm, mhm.
Like
Wow.
those are the those
Wow.
are
Yeah,
those are the 2 points of your life: when you're
yeah,
born and when you
yeah.
figure out why you are here. Um, and that
That's
second
so
one could
deep.
be that second part could be elusive, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
people may
mhm.
like just travel in the confusion and the depression and like all the things. But when you know why, you're like, oh, okay, it's on, right? Like it's much
Mhm,
easier
mhm,
to walk in faith, I think, and have like a steel spine when
mhm,
you're just like, oh no, I don't care. Yeah, this is an L right now that I'm suffering. I took a loss here. I took a loss here. I know why I'm here, so I know these L's are temporary, or these are learning
mhm.
experiences, right? Like because it is, I'm so focused, right? And so if we can be that way, it just makes us so much more powerful.
I look at your work around developing the educator pipeline and thinking deeply about how do we get the teachers that we need, and how
Mhm.
do we get more of our own people taking on the role of educator in a formal way, because we educate in a lot of ways. So I just don't want to, I want to always say that, but to formally go through the process of becoming educators, that is a critical plank in the way that you build a nation, you build the next thing. So seeing you do that work, seeing people like Travis Bristol, Dr. Travis Bristol, think
Mhm.
really deeply and intently about the higher ed part of that. Like,
Yeah.
how do we produce culturally competent teachers
Mhm.
is a big part of that work. Seeing people like Emden and others really devote their life to, I'm going to take a part of this lane and I'm going to do my part and I'm going to go hard on it,
Mhm.
is exactly what we need. We have people doing that right now for early childhood education. We have people doing that for school building. I'm thinking of, people like at the Charter School Growth Fund who think deeply and intently about how do we create new schools that are of special interest to the communities that they're in, and then how do we have a portfolio of them and then
Yeah.
grow the portfolio,
Better
and seeing
profile.
them have, like, 150 school leaders of color who are thinking that way. That's a nice size portfolio. Think
Yeah.
about this, Sharif. That 150 schools in their portfolio, led by people of color in the communities that they're from, is exactly the number of Black independent schools that we lost in Philadelphia, right? So it's almost a one for one in some ways. Like, yes, we've lost things in our portfolio of Black educational capital, and people like you and Daryl Cobb and Ebony Lee and Naomi
Mm.
Shelton
Mm.
at the
Joe
Charter
Ferguson,
Collaborative. We
all
could
those
keep going
guys.
down the
Yeah.
list. They're
Mhm.
building a new enterprise for us.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. It is. I mean, and so it's just so needed. You know what I mean? And it's like, and again, you said interconnected, right? Like it's all of the, it's all this. It's just not one area. It is like
Hmm,
all over,
hmm,
and we need people. It's all. it's almost like those beehives that we go in, right? Like they are all working on, even though they got different roles, but it's an entire ecosystem that they're like, no, this we must win. We must do
Mm,
this in order to survive. And I think that's very similar in education. In order for us to survive, we're going to have to carve out and create the space that we need for our very future. Like it's just,
mhm,
and it's not like cliche. It's not like, I mean, like literally, like it is, it is absolutely terrible for so many youth, whether it's their school experience or if it's the ramification of not having an education, right? Like the horrific components of not having a good education isn't just in the moment when you're in sixth grade
mhm, mhm,
and
mhm,
being not taught. The ramifications are lifelong, and you pass them on to your grandchildren. That's one of the things that values we say is like, what, education, being just in education in our approach. If we serve righteously, if we are doing all the things, we know it has an impact on our students grandchildren, right? Like, so that's how
mm.
we have to think about that. If we do this right with this student, their grandchildren will be impacted.
What's so great about that point and how it ties into today's topic around there are consequences and ramifications for the system, the education system that you're in, like later, that come later, that you don't see
Hmm.
today.
Hmm.
And many of those ramifications or consequences are really violent. So if you see people that are living a lifestyle where they're in a neighborhood or in a situation where it's really violent, or they're in poverty or they're living in ways in which you say you have to ask the question, man, how did you get there? Like, if I could have gotten to you 20 years earlier, what would
Yeah.
I have done differently about where you ended up? In most of those cases, you would learn that they learned things from time, that it wasn't just you woke up one day, you were a baby, and the next day you were in the middle of the street fighting as a
Mm.
fully grown adult with no reason in between. And the reason in between oftentimes is the education that you get, and you get the education from a system. And in that system, there are a number of mechanisms that could put you on the track for prosperity or put you on the track for welfare, jail, low wage work, not exactly poverty, but
Mm.
poverty adjacent lifestyles. There's just different things that could put you on different tracks.
Right.
I call that violence. I think that's violence. When we think
Hmm.
about in the main, when we look at 10% of Black kids coming out on reading proficient, for instance, feels like violence because you know what's going to happen to the 90%. You've seen that movie before. If I had to say to you, and we had to convince someone who has a really rosy picture of what education is, that the system is violence, that not only is it just not working, it's not just kind of flawed, but it
Hmm.
really is violent. How would we make our case? Like, what will we draw on to make a case to them that it really is violence?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think starting off with just the outcomes. And, I think sometimes people forget like how, you hear all these crazy arguments about the type of school and whether testing should happen. Like, and theoretically, philosophically, all those kind of things. Like, all right, sure, you just want to have this like intellectual conversation, debate, whatever. Yet if you ignore the actual reality of the outcomes, right? Like I'm thinking, my thing is always center like what's actually happening. Who's who's in jail? Who's struggling? Who has to move if the landlord raises the rent for $50? Who has to choose to live in abandoned homes? Right? And if you trace all of that back to what type of educational opportunities did they have, you will see this consistent thread. And I think for folks like us who've done social work and we got to see some of the impact, right? Like even if we didn't talk about education at all, but we just see the impact and outcome on people's lives. And then we started asking the question about their educational experience. You will constantly see a correlation.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think the biggest part is any when education can rob someone of of their hope and aspirations, that's violence, right? And we know on the other side, the most challenging uh, person is one who has no hope.
Hmm. Hmm.
If they have no
Mhm.
hope, that is the one that's going to be most challenging in the community.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then we have an educational system that robs children of hope, robs parents of those children of hope. And then when you add just this other layer of intergenerational, anything that we can look at as oppressive for generations, that's violence across generations. You've talked about this before. Like there's death quickly by gunshot, and there's slow death where it leads to misery. And in
Mm.
Islam, we say there's a saying, there's a quote actually in the Quran, the scriptures. It says, "Oppression is worse than slaughter." And I remember being a child. I'm like, well, how is oppression worse than slaughter? Like, oppression is like terrible. It's just like, but it's that fast death and then a lifelong of misery and all the impact that occurs, robbing of hope, destroying children because there's no future for that. And not that, and it doesn't mean like, oh yeah, just slaughter people instead of, it's just like really painting the picture of how vile oppression is. And you can't look at outcomes and not come to the conclusion that there's a lot of oppression happening in children's lives as students, as
Mhm.
students.
Mhm. Which is the craziest way and time for that to be the case, because as students, you want to send kids to school. You want them to have this kind of like um, magical experience, kindergarten, discovering your colors and your numbers and your, play and being excited, like,
Being
and then
excited.
first grade. And, you want that to carry on. We want
Yeah.
that storybook education life for our kids.
Yeah, yeah. The light, right? Though you see the light
Yeah.
in the child's eyes. You don't want
Yeah.
that diminished when they're in second, third grade. Like that's crazy, right? Like you
Yeah.
think of that. And I think a lot of times we're sold a story of that light just continues and that happiness
It
continues.
does for some kids.
Yeah, yeah.
For Black children, I discovered this years ago. People who have watched me long enough, you hear me say some of the same things on repeat. So this is something I've said before, so
Hmm.
bear with me. But when I used to visit schools a lot, um, I learned over time that the light goes out in many kids as they progress in school. Because when you like my favorite grade always to visit was kindergarten, because I would have so much fun as a visitor, just as a person who loves kids and a visitor and whatnot. These kids are usually in kindergarten so buoyant and excited to see you. And Mr. Stewart, like anything that you do is fun and
Right,
blah blah,
right,
and they're
right.
pulling on you. That's that whole thing. And if you're a person who loves kids, I mean, if you're not, I mean, good luck with your life in hell. But if you are a person who likes kids, that's like the most beautiful thing ever, like to visit kindergartens. I used to do it when I had to visit schools, and I would look forward to it in my day
Mm.
for kindergartens and first grade, and even in some of the later grades. But in different parts of the city and in different schools, once you got to second grade and then third grade and then fourth grade, you started noticing a change in the eyes of the kids,
Mhm.
and even just the light in the room and the kind of the feeling in the school. Like, I don't know if
Yeah.
that it probably makes sense to you because you visit schools,
Oh
but
yeah.
sometimes you just get a
Mm.
gut feeling, in a place.
You notice it as soon as you walk in the door.
Yeah, and some of those places really did feel like violence to me in that they were dark. It didn't feel like a place where kids were having fun or should be. And then you would go, even on the same day, you would visit schools in another part of town or in another place, and you would really start to see that we have two Americas.
Mhm.
Like, you would visit two schools and you would like, damn, this fifth grade over here is still kind of robotics and building things and whatnot. And this other school over here, everybody looks dead in the eyes and beleaguered, including the staff.
Yeah. They're like, we're just biding our time. We're doing
Yeah.
time. It's
Yeah.
almost like jail. We're doing time. The bell will ring and
That's
then we'll
terrible.
leave and
Yeah.
then we'll do the same thing the next day. And yeah, even the buildings, bro. Like, listen, there was a moment in Philly and probably beyond where there was some kind of idiot that said, the worst thing is like you're gonna have idiots in the village. The worst
Mhm.
part is when the leaders listen to the idiots. Like that's my thing.
Mhm.
Like yeah, you're gonna have people that are just that aren't about kids, that have terrible ideas. But when people in leadership listen, like you're supposed to be like the one that's saying like, nah, that's not consistent with our values. No, that's not consistent with human growth and development. So in Philly, there were a group of schools, including the one that I was at, that I taught in, where the windows were fogged over.
Mm.
So you'd have a classroom window, and it was like you couldn't look at the window and see outside, because for them, whoever designed this said, "Oh, well, that distracts kids." you know, so the
Oh, I'm
windows
laughing
had
because it
like
hurts.
this, yeah, this milky thing over it, so you couldn't see outside. And it just struck me. I'm just like, "Yo, we're in a box all day long." And like this, and of course there were no windows in the hallways. So you go from box to long box to square box to rectangular box hallway, right? Like in this cafeteria didn't have windows. It was just like most of the time in the building, there were no windows. Right. And then when you
Mhm.
just know like the impact of nature and light, and not the humming light from the fluorescent light, that you're hearing in the background all day, but like actual natural light and the impact that can have on your psyche. But yet they built schools with thousands and thousands and thousands of students with the idea that they shouldn't see outside. That'll distract them from learning. No, dummy. This box is distracting them from learning. But somebody
Yeah,
signed off on that, Chris. Somebody
yeah.
signed off on these millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build schools. And where folks are like, yeah, you don't deserve to look outside. And this is black communities, brown communities. And it's like
Yeah.
things like that I'm just like, that just shows you it seems like a small example, but it's colossal. It's colossal.
It's literally not a small example, in my mind, because someone's going to disagree with me when I say this, but I have visited a lot of schools. I've never visited a school in the suburbs where there's been intentional thought about the building of schools that matches some of the nihilistic looking gulags that I've visited in some cities. Like
Mhm,
in some city schools where I walk in and I'm like, who thought this was a good idea?
mm,
Like, literally, there are places where you walk in and you almost get mad right away, and you're
mhm,
like, who like was looking at this and thought what you just said? I'll sign off on that. Like,
mhm.
oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's
It's
frost the
wonderful.
windows, or
Yeah.
yeah, this is wonderful. I see we have two comments here. We have lots of comments, on different things, but this particular part I want to drive home because I think that violence oftentimes is structural. And Jay Will says architectural racism oppression is real, and it absolutely is real. Laura Johnson said, built them like prisons. The schools built them like prisons. Let me put those two things together.
Mm,
One of my worst examples of this is a school in Minneapolis. I think it's called Anderson now. I think it's been called Anderson for a while. And it was built in the 70s when many of the district schools that were built in the 70s were built by a common architecture firm who built prisons. And because they were afraid of riots because of the 70s. They had some student protests and things like that. They built the schools that they built in that era as riot proof, which meant they have no windows. They have several schools. And if you've ever seen the show Oz, like one of the high schools is built like Oz. It's in that octagon circular type of way with no windows on the first floor. And everybody looks into the middle, section, like just like a prison, actually, literally like a prison.
yo,
That's
bro.
structural and that sends a message.
It does. Listen, Zach Wright, he talks about the school he was placed at. It had to, how they'll show these scenes in the jail. Is exactly as you said. It's like the center ground, and then above it, it goes around with like a gate
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That was the common area for his school. Like, you know what I mean? And I had visited there, so I knew exactly what he was talking about. I put in our private chat, if you can put it on the other side. Um, this whole idea of, I wrote something a while ago. Like, there were story, and I never saw like concrete evidence, but it made sense. They said that a lot of as you said, like the architectural firms, they just, they'll like, yeah, I'll design this, I'll design that, I'll design your prison, I'll design your school. Well, the one that they had awarded in Philly was the same one that had was known for designing mental institutions.
Wow.
and it had the same type of type of thing, right? And so, you
Wow.
know, and then when you add that, they're like, oh, we need bomb shelters because the Cold War in Russia, blah blah blah, and you put all that together, and it's like, all right, now go be educated. But once white people and white flight started real, they were like, oh yeah, well, let's build a different type of school. And nobody saw it like our students who travel, whether they're on
Yeah.
science team. I remember when I first went to a suburban school, it was for I was part of the biology teacher had convinced me to join the science club. And
Mhm.
we went somewhere and the fair was in a school. Man, like you I'm just like this is my first time in a white school.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I mean, just the lawn and the yardage, right? Like, we couldn't even have a track or a field for our school because Acme brought it, which is a supermarket. Supermarket bought it. The district was like, ah, we ain't paying the price for that. So in the field, so right next to the school was a warehouse.
Mhm.
Right, and then you go see this, and he's like, lawns they're not even using. Lawns is just there to look pretty. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, wow. And then you go inside of it, and the light, the windows, just the flooring, like everything. And we're like, wow, this is a very different experience. And so those students who travel get to see it first if they're coming from, whether they're athletes, whether it's science, whether, whatever the case is, debate club, that's when they see like, oh, this we are two. That's when they see this is two different Americas. you know. Um,
Literally like two
yeah.
different Americas, and the kids
Mm.
aren't stupid. They see it and it's structural. Um, when I tell you about that school in Minneapolis, and we have more than one school like that. We have a school, North High in North
Mm.
Minneapolis that was
Mhm.
built in that same era, the 70s. You have football teams, so you have to go out to the
Yeah.
suburbs and you have to see sometimes what the other people are living, however the folks are living. And if you're not from Minneapolis, listen, you have a similar situation, I'm sure, where you are. There's a place called Minnetonka. It's a suburb. Our kids in North Minneapolis will have to play them in football at times, and there will be some interchange between students. And the idea of two Americas, like if you're coming from North High and you're going out to see what they have, this is years ago when I first found this distinction between the schools. Our school lunch, for instance, at the time that I was on the school board, was we were spending like $1.50, $1.60 or something like that, $1.70 per student for lunch. So we had all these kind of garbage nutrition companies coming to us to sell us contracts of like what kind of garbage they could give our kids for $1.70 or $2,
Mhm.
a meal
I
or
got
some
I got the
shit.
right garbage for
So
your kid.
right? Yeah. Now let's talk about violence again,
Mhm.
because what do you get for $1.75? You get something less than prison food. As a matter of fact, let's start there
Yeah.
because prisoners eat better than that. But you get a whole bunch of kind of like dinosaur chicken drummies and stuff like
Mhm.
that, where the chicken is like air quote chicken.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, in Minnetonka, their average daily price for per kid was 10.50
For
for
lunch.
lunch. For lunch. So ours was like a dollar 50, 60, 70, somewhere in there. I can't remember the exact kind of number, but it was like, $2. Let's just say, let's call it $2. Theirs was 10.50, which meant that they had salads and sushi, a sushi bar, and live cooked food. Now
Mhm.
we had all of the equipment to cook real live food. But if you went to our central kitchen that used to make real food for all the students, it was all shut down, and there was covers over all they used to make soups. They had a whole room just to roast chickens,
Mm.
like for the entire district, right? So that room was closed and shut. And what they had in front of all of that equipment were these women in hairnets with plastic gloves taking stuff off a conveyor belt from Tyson and other big, vendors, and
Those were
dropping it into these.
hazmat suits. Like get the food ready, like not to keep the hair in. It's like to keep the other stuff off their skin, man. It's
I
like,
mean, talk
yeah.
about violence though. Like you are sending a message to a kid of what they're worth with all of these decisions, what the building looks like, whether it
Mhm.
has light, the food that you feed them, who stands before them in a classroom, how the person who stands before them in the classroom acts towards them,
Yeah.
whether or not you have metal detectors right at the beginning of the day, and open your let me look in your bag and all of that type of stuff. Start adding all of those up, and you are telling a kid a story. And the story that you're telling them, I think, creates violence in their mind.
Oh, 100%, man. I mean, and when you think about the idea that children, black children, there's research. This is these things that Chris and I are talking about, and we talk about often, but we're particularly talking about like the violence of it. Really want people to sit in it and understand like how violent it is. Because a lot of times, the first time people think about violence, it's about physical violence. That's yeah, that's bad. That's terrible. That's a thing. But there's a thing that's called emotional violence, intellectual violence, cultural violence, spiritual violence. Right? When
Mhm,
Bettina
mhm,
Love talks about spirit murdering experiences for kids, like I was like, yeah, like I understood exactly what she meant by spirit murdering, right?
mhm,
And when the research shows that black children as early as 3 and 4 years old experience their teachers' racial biases. And I think about like a 3 year old and a 4 year. You talk about like that light, and if they're experiencing that, at what point when we look at we describe it as the light diminishing, and some of it is checking out for their own personal safety, right? Like the only
mhm,
way for me to survive this, doing my time in here, is just to check out of this because I can't articulate it as a young child, but I know this is jacked up. This is a jacked up experience. So I'm just going to check out or respond with rage, with childlike rage, in a lot of different ways. And it may it may manifest against myself, it may manifest against my classmate, it may manifest like however, but where did it come from? Right? Like where did it come from?
mhm,
And what's the violence like that people are subjected to over and over and over? Even just the fact that you can't see your own self in a book. And the teacher like, this is the best book. This is amazing. Every day for
mhm,
180 days. And not once
mhm,
do you see a kid that looks like you, a character that you can identify with. Right? At what point does your teacher not say it, but you understand that they're saying you're a stowaway to this life? You're not a
mhm.
passenger. You're certainly not a driver. You're a stowaway. You don't
Wow.
belong.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't
I
belong.
mean, so your experience within the school system as a kid, as you're going along, is a story. Every message that you get is creating a story.
Mhm.
And what you just said helped me extend that story in my mind. Grade by grade, as kids progress, they're putting together more information about what is this system telling me about myself. And eventually, when they check out, that is a healthy response of a human being that was born to be free. The checking
Self-preservation.
out, self-preservation, and also disconnect from the thing that you have determined is toxic for you.
Mhm.
But here's what the system likes to do with that story. The system likes to
Oh
say,
man.
okay, we know that we give you less. We know that we put you in places and in buildings that no child should be in.
Mhm.
We know that we have diminished your connection to the school by breaking the trust with you, by providing you cultural materials that have nothing to do with you.
Mhm.
And that you can determine at an early age, like, this ain't me. Like, this is for some other kid. Oh, I get it. Those other kids are important and I'm not. Because you're telling me a story that's completely made for them. You
Mhm.
know, yeah, so we know we did all that, and we feed you crap, we give you the wrong food, and we treat you like we treat schools like starter prisons. So when you come in, we shake you down, and we do all this stuff with you. You could be a perfectly kind of innocent kid in every way, and you're going through the same pattern of stories that you're being told. These things, you're picking up messages, and kids little by little are sponging up information. They're not stupid. They're processing it. They're thinking
Mhm.
about it,
Mhm.
and they don't have the words to deal with adults BS about it, but they do have cognition.
Oh yeah.
And eventually when they check out, because you have trained them this way, then we blame you for checking out. We even further the abuse then, right?
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna crush you,
Yeah.
right? We're gonna crush you by this experience. And then when you show any form of resistance or checking out, then we're gonna crush you some more. We're
Mhm.
gonna
Mhm.
punish you for having the audacity to say, this isn't right.
Mhm.
This isn't
Mhm.
right. And that deserves punishment. Now we're gonna come. Listen, I was just thinking about like we didn't have the searches and all that kind of stuff when I was a kid, right? But knowing, nowadays they would have said like, oh, back in the day they would have called it, oh, yeah, Elmeki, you have oppositional defiant disorder. Like, yeah, I'm oppositional to stuff that don't make sense. Yeah, I still
Mhm.
am. I still
To
have.
oppression, to
Yeah, I
oppression. Yeah.
still am
Yeah.
oppositional to your nonsense. I still
Mhm.
am, and I can only imagine. And I remember the first time, and of course, just with growing up with activists, how police operate. I remember the first time a cop grabbed me, and I remember what my reaction was. I was 14 years old. I remember my reaction. This was in
Mhm.
school, bruh. This was in school, walking down the hallway because she thought I didn't have a hall pass. I did. It was in my pocket. But like, that type of, and I remember my response. So of course I end up in trouble. Right. But I'm just thinking like, suppose that was like every morning.
Mm.
Every morning. Like I had that. I was leaving homeroom to go to the bathroom.
Wow.
Imagine having that type of or even worse, suppose you brace yourself for that all the way from the time you wake up or leave the house to walking to. So forget like the moment, well, don't forget it, but put that to the side, right? Like that you're going to experience it. Imagine bracing yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually,
Mhm.
because you're like, this is what I'm going to encounter. And we have to keep going back to, it's almost 200 days a year that you're braced. I know how I respond when TSA going to the airport. Like
Mhm.
I'm just
Just
like,
one part of your
what?
one day.
Like, yeah, just
Yes, yes,
like,
that is such a good
I ain't go to
example.
gym
Yeah.
every morning, and then it's like,
Yes.
come learn.
That's right. I mean, God, that is such a stunningly good example because I'm such a jackass for those few minutes that I go through TSA. I hate
Bruh.
it. Now imagine
They,
that being your full day.
wow.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
Wow. Um,
Yeah.
school ID, I think it's schooled or school ID with uh the Demetria Giles says add to the
Oh,
conversation how
school. Yeah.
students are or are not allowed to move in the building and how lunch is presented, for example, family style. This is a great uh, comment because we've talked about the building, we've talked
Mhm,
about the messages that you get and whatnot. But just what you just said matches up with what Demetria is saying, which
mhm,
is also your movement throughout the day. You have visited, I have visited, and you have visited some schools where kids are managed within an inch of their life every second of every day. There
mhm,
is and maybe you would know more than this about this than I do because I know very like surface level about it. But there's a theory that in schools that goes along with the broken windows theory that you manage every second. So like
mhm,
lost seconds of time is what's part of what's, why kids of color or poor kids aren't learning. So you manage like McKinsey style every minute of every day, and lost minutes is lost achievement. That's your mindset. When you go into a school that takes that really seriously, everything from going to the bathroom, how you walk through the hall, how you go through, how you transition from class to class to class, you are managed within an inch of your life. And when you come home after that day, it's like, oh my God, you just like, I mean, so if parents, if you're watching this and you're sending your kids to one of those schools and your kid comes home and unloads at the end of the day, as if they've been, on a, marathon or something, you might be in one of those overmanaged schools that treats kids like really like what I call starter prisons, treats them like starter prisoners and captives throughout the day. And that, number one, I think that's violence, but it's so draining, of a child's energy.
yeah. And the adults. And this is the one that's, and well, I want to add some complexities to it too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Particularly like around the time, because on the other side, right? Like it's like just it's jacked up, bro. All right, so we got the one time where it's just like, oh, kids won't, learn if we don't manage every second, right? And so it's extremes, right? Like, so how do we get to a balance? And that's what I think. Part of the challenge is everything's in balance. In Islam, we believe like in balance, everything in its right position at the right place, right time. Like that adds balance, and balance is just. On the other side of the extreme of over managing every second of a child's life, which is not only draining to the students, draining to the teacher. And can the teacher, if that's what they're doing all the time, are they really? thinking intellectually, deeply, rigorously about how do children learn best and how do I, help them understand this complex issue that they can own and master, manipulate in their own thinking. On the other side, we had people, and I know this because I've not only experienced, I had to stop people doing. I've presented and developed other leaders in what to do, where there's a waste of time. There's no management of time. You'll hear principals making announcements, random announcements throughout the day on
Mhm,
loudspeakers,
mhm,
interrupting
mhm,
instruction over dumb stuff.
mhm.
So and so come to the office, whether it's a kid, whether it's a teacher, whether it's just any old dumb stuff. Call their cell phone, like what I mean. Go find them. Get up and go find them. Right, just from their room. Oh, so and so come, like multiple times a day. Call in the room. Just all kind of like crazy stuff. Um, I remember I remember this one secretary would call the room all the time. Ding, ding, in the middle. Oh, gotta stop, go answer the phone. So and so in there. I'm like, did you look at the roster? Did you look at the
Mm,
roster? I don't have that period today. But anyway, but you also have people who say, well, it's Monday. So we're not actually going
mhm.
to teach right now because the kids just got back from the weekend.
Yeah.
So we're not going to teach. It's Monday morning. The kids are, oh, it's Friday. We're not going to teach today because it's almost the weekend. The kids are antsy. The kids are da da da. Oh, it's the day before Thanksgiving. It's the day before Christmas. Oh, it's the day before Flag Day, and the kids are so excited. They're bouncing. They're bouncing around.
About Flag Day. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's
as Black
before
people,
lunch.
we know we love us some Flag Day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
period before lunch. So
yeah.
we're doing. Oh, it's the period after lunch. They need to transit. Oh, it's the period before gym. Oh,
Mhm,
oh, it's the
mhm.
period after. Like, yo, when you teaching, dog? Like, when are the kids learning? Right?
You
Like,
know
and
what,
so
though? I
that's
love this as a
violent.
new that's a good nuance too, though, because that's a reminder to me to never go one direction
Yeah.
100% because on one side you have the overmanagement of every second of a child's day to the point where it feels like oppression, almost like we used to send kids into the cotton fields with water, jugs every day to help the slaves stay hydrated and
Hmm.
and eventually work them into the field mentality. And on the other side of that, you have really low expectation schools where there's chaos.
Hmm.
And chaos is another form of violence.
That was the other
Kids,
piece I was gonna
yeah, yeah.
bring up. Like, I know, and this is so horrific. Like, every time I think about it, I just elementary school, where a fifth grader boy raped a third grade boy
Mm, mm,
in the stairwell.
mm.
Right? And when they like kind of look, I mean, just think about the horrific of those children, those families, their classmates, the school, kid who had nothing to do with that, but they're walking down like, oh, oh, you go to that school, oh, you're gonna get raped, right? Like all of that, like that, that happened in that in that instance. And it was also when they peeled back, someone didn't even know the kid was out of their room, right? Like there
Wow.
was no management of
Mhm,
movement,
mhm, mhm,
right? And I think a lot of times, like, yo, like you got other people's children and you have 600,
mhm.
and you sometimes I come across people who just like, yeah, just let children just walk, and then I'm just like, yo, like there should be some safety is number one, and not that
Mhm.
that's an extreme example, but I don't care if the kid fell down the stairs.
It's
I don't care if
extreme, but
it's
it's not uncommon,
it's
Sharif.
not
It's not
uncommon.
uncommon.
It's not
Yeah, that's
whether
the
it's,
part
it's
that's
some
hard.
type of violence, right? And then
Mhm.
so then when I hear people with these like intellect, like just free, and kids should just be able to walk out and just say, "I'm leaving the room to go to," like come on, man. Like that's have you managed an auditorium full of kids before? Have you
Mhm.
managed a school like I ain't got time for dumb stuff either, because I'm like that ain't how you operate with adults. You sure want traffic lights and red lights and this and that. You want that,
Mhm.
and when you go to a country to visit, you're like looking down on them. Oh, look at this. They have no lights. Oh, look at this. You know what I mean? So it's just, again, it's just a balance of, at the end of the day, are you starting with love for that community? Because if you
Mhm.
don't have that, if you don't feel accountable and just like, listen, that servant leadership mentality, this value of serving righteously, this love for the community, when you look at them as you and they looking at you as them, then let's start there, and then let's say, okay, how do we create a safe learning environment?
A
But I got a lot of
safe,
jokers. Yes,
like name some
nurturing,
other things. Safe,
nurturing,
orderly,
orderly,
nurturing, loving, kind,
predictable.
predictable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the
Uh,
opposites of
l-
these things, because we know all these things we just said are good for children: loving, caring, kind, nurturing, orderly, structured, reliable,
mhm.
like trust building. These things all matter.
Some of trust building is
So
predictability, right? Like it's just
yeah.
like, hey, I know I'm going to be served well. My daughter, when my mother passed away, my daughter was first grade, and it was really, really rough on her. So we already had COVID, so initially she couldn't even see her that much. Um, and then it happened, so it was like a lack of like, fortunately she got towards the end, she got to spend a little time, but my first grader was going through it.
Mm-hmm.
But for her to be able to say, sometimes when I'm sad, I can speak to somebody. I can speak to the counselor when I'm in school and I'm not at home. And I just thought about it, and so of course I'm asking, like, how do you know that you feel safe there? How do you know that that's the right person? Just to try to understand like what she's going through, and for which builds trust with me, right? Because then I'm like, all right, when Zainab is feeling something, there's someone that can support her, right? And they would also, the teacher was like, hey, she had a rough day today, she was crying, blah blah blah, right? Like, and so we're helping her, but how many times a kid may be going through something and there's no help, there's no patient, you can't predict, there's nothing reliable about the system. And forget the system, sometimes kids are like, there's no adult that's reliable in this building for me,
Yeah.
right? Like you were talking about SEL and emotional deregulation. You know who needs that the most? Adults. Adults need to regulate their emotions,
Yeah.
far more. They're the ones modeling. And so, the unpredictability of how my day is going to be, as a child, is also another form of violence,
And
because
you know
that is
what?
something that creates the safety for a child to flourish. And if they're always like this, that's stress. That's those. What's
Hmm.
what's that? What's that chemical that releases every time you have like that stress? The cortis is it cortisol?
Yeah, your flight or flight
Yeah,
chemical. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that goes up your back.
Flight, freeze,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
fight. Right, like.
yeah.
Imagine being pumped into your veins as a child all day long.
And to be fair to schools, it's an extension of your community life also. So like there are some communities that like randomness is something I don't find in very orderly communities. In my community where I live, people take very strong pride and ownership in ways, whether they're poor, middle class, rich, or whatnot. One of the common things is nobody has a raggedy lawn, for instance. Like
Yeah,
everybody, Saturdays or whatnot, Sundays, people get out there, they
they're
do their
around
lawns,
there
they
doing
do
it.
this, whatever. And they spend whole damn days doing it. It drives me absolutely crazy because it's not my thing.
I'd
I'm
get
not
I
it.
get I get fined. I'd be like, "Yo, this is messing up my biodiversity. I don't want to do my lawn. I want it to grow." Yeah, I mean, the
I'm not
neighbors
into it at
the
all, just to
neighbors
be
might
very
be
honest
looking
with
at me
you.
like, "Yo, man, what's up with the boy? He never do his lawn on Saturdays."
People take it seriously. I'm just not into it, but I like the result. I like driving through and seeing an orderly society, right? So you have kids that are growing up in an orderly society where the streets are clean and the potholes aren't too big, and there's a system of order. There's a sense of order in which they play in and they grow in. There's other communities that you go into, and there you will walk down the street, and there will be a tricycle and a diaper and a bag of fast food refuge, all within your steps of like taking several steps or whatnot. And you keep walking into that community, walking through, like when you canvas or you do door knocking in certain communities, and you have to go from community to community to do that door knocking, which I've done, as a person that gets involved with some campaigns and stuff. That was my learning a long time ago, was just like thinking about the kids who are in those different environments. What's How cluttered their minds will be, how orderly their minds will be, what will be their expectation of how a city should work, what will be their expectations of, like, just for instance, in Minneapolis, there are some streets, parts of the city that get the snow removal before others do, right? every morning. Like, so in some mornings, it could take you a half hour to get out your damn house to go to work. And in some mornings, you're like, you're out. You just jump in your car and you're
Just so
gone.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a different way that you have to prepare as a worker and a parent and as a kid,
Hmm.
based on where you live in the city, for instance, and how
Waiting
the
on the
city
bus
services
stop
are
that
set up.
might not have that might not have been shoveled to navigate. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, you see winter and kids like navigating. Oh, it's not going to be. You know, either your car was snowed, plowed in, like yeah, all of that, man. It's just
It adds up.
yeah, it
It
adds
adds
up,
up.
man. It
Yeah, it
adds
adds
up.
up for a
You
kid, and
know.
then you go to school, and you have the version of the not non-plowed school streets in your school, a version of that in schools. Like,
Hmm.
what's the, in you go to school and there are things that don't work like they're supposed to work, right? We had kids come to us once at a school board meeting in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is not a poor city. Minneapolis is a rich city with a lot of money and a lot of college educated people, and it's very progressive and very liberal in all the worst ways. All the ways in which white liberalism kind of like can be the Kool-Aid, the Jim Jones Kool-Aid that kills you. Minneapolis has got that going on in spades. They're not poor, they're not broke, they got resources. But North High and Southwest High School live on two totally different planets. And it's
Hmm.
gotten better over time with some different forms of leadership or whatnot. But there was a time in which the students came to the school board meeting, the best athletes in the district who were at North High, by the way, um, said, we don't have running water on our football field. We don't have an operating bathroom. We have a porta potty. They started to enumerate the things. The lights don't go on, don't stay on long, blah, blah. And everything that they were naming was something that was the opposite of what was going on at our richest, wealthiest, whitest high school that was only 3 miles away.
Hmm.
Like 3 miles from their high school was another high school in the same city that
Hmm.
had the opposite going on of everything with
Yeah.
the same progressive school board, with the same kind of district leadership that love to
Say-
talk about
But
equity and
not like
everything else.
not cross county line, like
Across
within.
county lines, nah, bro. It's not like one was in Hazard County with the Dukes of Hazard, and the other was like in
Yeah,
Rosewood or some crap like that. No, no, no. Same
yeah,
city,
same.
same liberal school board who all run on equity and whatnot. How has it happened in the United States where you can operate a high school from that's two to 3 miles away
Hmm.
from each other in the same city, that have a night and day? And oh, by the way, when they decided to do refurbishing, they spent $40 million to make the Southwest High School even bigger and better than it was, and left North High just exactly the way it
So
had been
like
built in the
y'all
1970s.
good, y'all all right, yeah.
Y'all good. You don't need running
I
water
mean,
or better
yeah.
fields or any of that.
And you raised such a great point. And we haven't even talked about like vermin and all that kind of stuff, right? Lead in the water. You can't drink. Hey, can't drink the water fountain. But you've been drinking it for 30 years now. But like, oh crap, lead in the water. Um, a lot of times we talk about inequities across county line, right? Like I know, and that's a thing, right? In Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court is hearing out, this racist funding formula that they've had for forever. Just straight out racist in how they distribute money. They've been able to show, other people have been able to show, including Power, group of faith-based organizations that have come together and really address oppression. School funding was one of the things they addressed, where they showed in this study, the darker your district, the less funding you're going to get. Control
Hmm.
for everything else. Bottom line, the darker you are. Even when they compared poor white communities in Pennsylvania and their school funding next to poor black and brown communities, less funding. So it wasn't just like, well, that district's poor, so they get. No, we're looking at two poor districts, and it's still a big difference, amongst that. But we look at county lines, right? And so, like our state senator Vincent Hughes did a really like a smart thing. He took people, instead of talking about it in like the capital, he's like, no, let's go visit, and so he visited a school, Overbrook High School. Um, and then he took them to another school that was still within his um, you know, area, and for them to see like this is the lived experiences of your same constituents. They got a whole weather you know channel basically for this school, and this school can't get water,
Mm.
can't get a bio teacher or whatever, right? Like, and so all those kind of things. But I think what you're raising is a really important point. We can't ignore the inequities within a district with the same school board, same superintendent, same union, same blah blah blah, all the woke, the woke water that everybody's drinking. And it's radically different. So yeah, point to the county line, point to across the state, point to the capital, and this is within your locus of control.
Within this is the thing I've always said about Black folks, just period. We are the proof of the American lie.
Hmm.
So everything that America says that's great about itself, you point to Black people and we become the proof of it being a lie, right?
Oh
Liberty,
yeah.
freedom, equality, the pursuit of happiness, all of these things that we love to say, all the white things that we love to say about America. There's this one group of people that sit in the corner that like, ah, 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 ah. Yeah, yeah, you can say all that you want. And the same thing happens in progressive cities with so-called progressive or liberal values. The same thing, we are the lie in progressive cities.
Mhm.
Same school board, same superintendent, same set of values, same system. Garfield High School in Seattle at one point was so segregated internally in the one high school itself. It was one of the choice high schools. Jesse Hagopian has made himself a national kind of Black Lives Matter teacher leader across the country. He was in that high school.
Mhm.
And I remember that was the reason I looked it up, because of his activism. And I looked up in that school. It was so segregated that all of the Black kids were on the first floor of the school and all the white kids were on the second floor up of the
And that
school.
must be where the
And
AP and honor courses were, second floor, right?
thank you very much. In one of the most liberal cities in the United States, they literally had two tracks, two Americas going on in one high school. And they had all the things when it came to the progressive values. They had all of the rhetoric and the t-shirts and the bumper stickers and the walkouts and the Black Student Union and the Black Power stuff and whatnot. But what they didn't have were allies who wore all of those t-shirts to say, it's probably not smart to have the white kids on a balcony yelling down at the Black kids during the day and have it just be just that clear that they were looking down on the Black kids all day,
Mhm.
right? It
Look,
probably
our
wouldn't be
our
smart.
allies love a
So
t-shirt, though.
they
Our
love the hell
allies,
out of a t-shirt.
man, they swag, you know what I
They
mean? Like,
love the hell out of a t-shirt.
they t-shirt, the lawn joints, the lawn things, and bumper stickers, man, they
Yeah, lawn signs, Black lives, everybody's welcome here, and silence equals, complicity, and whatever. They've got all of that stuff working for them. But this is what's violent about that, is we have always gaslit children in a variety of ways. One of the
mhm,
ways is we tell them, I'm your ally, I'm here for you, I'm your ultra woke kind of guardian angel here. And at the same time, I don't trust that you have cognition, that you should be in a school with high standards, with great outcomes, where everybody should be on the hook for making sure that the outcomes are good. Not the rhetoric, not the t-shirts, not the bumper stickers, because none of those things will prepare you for a life of less violence. The thing that will prepare you for a life of less violence is making you a true scholar. That is the thing that will help you get your head right in a country that doesn't want you to have your head right. But instead, what they get are people who put them in shoddy buildings, negative circumstances, low opportunity pedagogies and coursework, uneven ceilings in terms of the academics. And by what I mean by that is, in one school, the ceiling for how high you can go in English or math is here, like at a 5 or something. Let's give them number scales. In another school, it's a 10, and blah blah. And that type of opportunity to learn, because you can't learn it if it's not in the building. So just that opportunity to learn is color coded, right? We could keep talking for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or more, and these examples would keep coming up, but all of these examples at the end, when you put them all together, is a violent message to children of who matters and who doesn't. And I can understand why by 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, for many children of color, they have assumed, they have learned, if they haven't learned, there might be something wrong with them. They have learned which students America values most and which ones they don't. They have learned who the systems are built for and who they are not built for. And even the ones with ultra woke kind of teachers and teacher leaders and others, you know, pumping them up with cultural messages, those kids know where they're
mhm,
going to fit in the world afterwards. They know whether they're on the track for Harvard or whether they're on track for Chipotle, right? Like they're not dumb. They're not stupid. And for me, that is violence because I will say this: after 400 years, 500 years, or more, to still be telling non-white people when non-white people are the global majority. 10% of the world's population is white, 70% of the world's wealth is held by that 10%. So to continue colonizing kids in this way and just throwing your hands up. I don't know why, only 10% of them aren't learning to read or learning what they need to learn. But we're an information society with some of the best universities in the world, with some of the most information we've ever had in ever. But it's a mystery why we can't do better for these kids. We can't feed them better. We can't get them in better buildings. We can't give them lead-free water. We can't give them super prepared teachers. We can't give them culturally relevant pedagogy that helps them understand their place in the world and makes them see themselves as a scholar. It's just all a mystery. Like we
mhm,
just don't know how to do it. So I think we should just give the schools more money, fewer, less accountability, and just trust educators who are mostly white, mostly women. This is all violence when you add it all up, that we should even have to um we should even have to convince people of it is in itself an act of violence because we are being gaslit so big. Now I want to get your final word on all this because we are wrapping to the end time, but before we do, I just want to show this one thing because we were talking about school buildings earlier. You pointed us to an article that is in Philly's 7th ward, that was like who designed my school, and that school was designed by people who design mental health or actually, what do you call them? Because I don't want to call them what we would have called them back in the day.
well,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, well,
uh,
back then they called them insane asylums, like,
insane
that's what they
asylums, yeah. We called them
yeah,
crazy houses or something like that, but
mhm,
I don't think you call them that anymore.
yeah,
But Fielding, is that this is what I have up right now is a link to a site for Fielding International, who designs schools with everything that has been thought through about the way that a building and an environment enhances or decreases learning.
mhm,
So part of the science of their architecture is how kids learn the best, and designing. Look at this picture here: big, open, airy, high ceiling areas increase creativity. For instance, that's one of the
mhm,
learnings, that like the lower the ceiling, kind of, there is a physical psychosocial relationship between the height of a ceiling, for instance, in your
mhm,
building, and how much creativity goes on with students. Isn't that crazy? Like learning.
mhm,
But guess who will get this type of school
yeah,
before other kids will get it, right? Art rooms that are supposed to look like art room, and they're supposed to generate. I mean, look at these kids; they look so happy, and just so, like this looks like the Disneyland of schools. Lots of open spaces for kids to sit and work independently, where there is sunlight and they can be off to their own. These are design choices that we could make. Schools can look like
mhm,
nice buildings. They don't have to. Now this looks very much like the high school, recently built high school that my son goes to in a very rural area, right?
mhm,
But you walk in and you feel like you feel valued and like you're supposed to be here. Lots of spaces for kids to run, to play, that are integrated the indoor outdoor nature of their buildings. Fielding does a lot of this, where the indoor outdoor nature
outdoors or
of learning and
classroom,
data.
yeah,
Yeah, outdoor is a classroom.
mhm,
So these are like intentional ways when you love kids. This is what you do. This is what you design for kids when you love them. um, and for anybody listening or watching who sees this, think about how far we are from that with some of the schools that you know of in your
mhm,
city. When you think about, I have visited schools like this in places where it's not outlandish. Like this one that I just showed you is one of their internationals. This is one of their schools in another country, but there are lots of suburban schools that look just like this.
oh, yeah,
They look
100%,
just like this. So you have a whole group of American kids that are learning in an environment like this
yeah,
when others aren't.
yeah, yeah,
That
I
to me
mean,
is violence.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't even have to be like in the suburbs, right? Like that, it can be done. I had the opportunity through Edlock and Transcend to visit schools with our assistant principal, and some of the things that how people were designing schools and spaces of learning was incredible, right? Like it was incredible, and it was in the city. It was like convert. You think about all the abandoned, industrialized cities, and all the abandoned warehouses that are still standing, or in Philly, the abandoned schools, right? They shut schools down, but I know Ray is like, turn them into lofts. Like, there are many of them who are not lofts. They are just
Yeah.
sitting there a decade later, taking up blocks and blocks and blocks, and it's abandoned, right? So it's
Mm,
basically blight times X, blight on steroids, right? Imagine this school that used to house 3,000 plus kids, and it's been abandoned for a decade, you know, like like that's violence too, right? Like that's just like,
mhm,
and then but shaming, families who have to move or whatever, and they couldn't keep up their parents' home because that would be an extra mortgage and a tax, right, and so it's for whatever reason, right? But you can leave as a city a building that huge. Matter of fact, when we were traveling, we should have rode by there when we visited the Johnson House, because it's not too far from there. It's in Germantown section of Philadelphia. Every time I ride by there, I'm just like, this is unbelievable. But a lot of like
mhm.
what you saw in that like architecture firm, that could be done, right? Like that could be done, and imagine that. So even if the outside has this whatever look, inside could look radically different. You mentioned something about like the lies that are being told, and the hypocrisy of America, and it started a long time ago, right? And so a lot of times some of these same people, they'll say like, "Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa," and then they'll refer to old white races as their founding fathers. And I'm like, you know what? They're not the founding fathers of this country. The indigenous people were the founding fathers of this country. Um, and after that is the black people who built so much of the country, right? So those are actual founding fathers. What they're founding fathers of, though, is the mindset that occurs today, even from the folks who drink the woke water and got the shirts and the lawn signs and all that. Their founding fathers are the hypocrites who said one thing and totally meant that it was just whatever they were saying was just for a very small group of people. Because we see that in our schools, we see that in the policies, we see that in how the cities are run and managed, we see how where the money flows. That's the founding fatherhood. They've had a very specific meaning. So here's a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are.
Mm.
Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Now, mind
And I don't
you,
know if I agree with that.
I don't know.
You know why I
What?
say I might not agree
Tell
with
me.
it?
Tell me why.
Okay. Because some of the people who are not affected by it will never be outraged by it because it serves them. It'd be like me being outraged by cake, right? Like I'm not gonna be outraged by cake because I love cake. Cake is good, right? Cake is like one of the best things in life. It's like one of the best inventions in diets. Bad for you, but it's like one of the best inventions. So someone said like there will never be like health
What
until
are we doing here?
so people who benefit from injustice, waiting on them to be outraged by it as a condition for it to end. There are times in history, like if you study slave revolts, or like like the Haitian overthrow, or things like that or whatnot. I think those people who were not outraged by injustice
Hmm.
woke up in the middle of the night with their houses on fire, and people with hatchets in their living room.
Hmm.
uh and that hatchet in the living room thing kind of it
That
changes your
turns
outlook
something.
on it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
I can't argue with that. The cake thing, I don't know. This is the second analogy. I agree,
yeah.
but my point is yes, I totally hear you, and I agree. Like the self determinant aspect of it is missing from this point. It doesn't elevate it, enough. But my point is, this quote was during the time of enslaving other people.
Hmm,
And he's
hmm.
saying
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
hey,
yeah,
justice
yeah.
won't won't reach there until people who are like, yo, this is Ben Franklin, who
Mhm,
at one
mhm,
point owned slaves, was fine. He was a total racist, right? But this is like a national hero, founding father. But he's a founding father of a mindset, right? And because that's why he can be fine. He's fine with two worlds. He's fine with thinking about this, thinking about the tyranny of Britain, but not thinking about the tyranny in Philadelphia, in Congo Square, down by the wharf, right? Like he
mhm,
was. That's the same mindset now. Like fine with this school for this kid, that school for that kid, this policy for this kid, that policy for that kid. They're fine with it. So their founding father messages, they did really well. Like it is still seeped into how the structure of this country is doing, and book clubs and
yeah.
stuff ain't going to change it, right? It's going to take, I'm
Well,
not
it
going to say
might. I mean,
hatchets, but it
yeah.
might, it might, it's going to take something a little bit more. And the other thing that I just want to, add in my closing is this, again, I bring this up so much because, when Malcolm talked about who taught you to hate yourself, how many
Mhm,
children can say my school did, the curriculum did, the way
mhm,
my building
mhm,
was designed did?
mhm,
But it's not just like, oh, I hate myself. Too many kids actually learn how America actually feels about them within their schools.
mhm,
That's where they learn. Back in the day, a few years ago, they did CNN did this "When I Learned I Was Black" type of thing, and so many of the people's experiences were talking about an experience in school was when they realized, and I think they should have changed it a little. Like some of it wasn't necessarily, kid like, oh, I just thought I was a kid, blah blah blah. Then I realized, I think part of what was missing, was invisible, is like, when did they learn that they were hated for being black?
mhm, mhm,
That would have been, but that's probably too long of a hashtag,
mhm,
but I think it's within schools is how often they find out, wow, this is how much they hate Latinos. This is how much they hate black people. This is how much they hate indigenous people. They learn it in school. Yes, they learn it in social media as well. Yes, they learn it in media, but they learn it in schools as well, where it
mhm.
should be a safe haven, and it's anything but. That's violence.
That's where you first, I think, learn about your status
Hmm.
in society is in
Yeah.
school.
You're like, oh,
You
it is
you
a
know
caste system. Wait a minute.
Mhm,
Y'all
mhm,
talking about the caste system over in this country, that country, this
mhm,
I'm in the basement and the white kids are in the AP course upstairs.
mhm,
That's a academic caste system.
mhm.
That's, I mean, and call it anything else that you want, it ain't going to change what it is.
No, and I think that has to be a violent this is we keep using this word today, that has to be a violent recognition. The recognition of where you exist within a society where when you transfer from I'm just a kid, like any other kid, and I have birthdays and I bounce through life and I see
Mhm,
characters on TV who are, like Tigger and others, and I just have that childness about me until I have my first confrontation with the world, where I get the message of, oh, damn, I'm not just a child. I'm a special kind of kid. I'm in a category. And
mhm,
once you get that and you learn that, that has to be a dispiriting, uh, what you said earlier, murder spiriting thing, which comes from the book from, just so for people listening, comes from Dr. Bettina Love's book. Um,
we want to do more than survive.
Want to do more than survive, which I think is interesting
I don't know if
about
that's the subtitle or the actual title, but
I think what's interesting about her book, and that message that relates to violence in today's show is that her book and her message literally have been spelled out in laws to be prohibited from being taught in schools now,
mhm, mhm.
right? How would you like to spend your time and your scholarship studying the ways in which the society is unequal, to put it into a book so that other people can engage with the research around how society is unequal, and to have the response be for some white parents to go to their state lawmakers, and for their lawmakers to pass laws that specifically say that the schools are prohibited from teaching your scholarship. That's violence. That's
Yeah.
not just violence, that's gangster violence. The
Mhm.
ability to be able to say, after all these years, we're going to still teach your kids that their captors were their founding fathers.
Mhm.
Who is your daddy? Your daddy is your captor. What?
Yeah,
That ain't
yeah,
my daddy. I don't
yeah.
know whose daddy that is. That's
I
your daddy.
mean, but
No,
the
no, no,
thing
no.
about it,
Yeah,
some of
go
them they were right. They raping folks, so in a way,
so that might be your daddy if we did like a historical Maury thing. But I mean, to tell them that, the American document that called them three-fifths a person is
mhm,
sacrosanct and somehow religious and can never be like
yeah,
challenged or
yeah,
overturned,
straight
and
from
we should
God.
never start again. Yeah, straight from God. And that, these guys had some flaws, but they were brilliant. They started the most perfect nation union ever. All that
And
stuff. That's
and look
violence.
at them in the context of the history. Like I did. There were other white people who didn't know, who weren't enslaving, that
Yeah.
were helping to free, that were fighting and getting beat up in Congress for saying this is wrong. So I
Mhm.
did look in that kind of, because they were like, oh, you can't compare this. Like, no, I actually looked at other people during that time.
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I love these discussions of you can't. No, I can.
I can and I
Yeah, I
will.
can. You don't have to do it because it serves you to do the Jim Jones Kool-Aid thing with our kids where you feed them this kind of white supremacist ideology that has been crafted and created over time to create a national story, a single national story. And now what they are doing, which is very violent, is they're using their color-coded political power to outlaw thought, to say what can be thought and what can't be thought even. And isn't it interesting that
What
the
can't be
things that
thought and
that
what can't be
what
fought. Yeah.
yeah. And interesting. Well, if it can't be thought, it literally can't be fought, which is
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
again. So we are living in the Willie Lynch letter 3.0 right now. We are living in a Willie Lynch simulation, and this is the new version of it. We're going to outlaw all that stuff y'all think. Now, there was a time where you would get your finger cut off
Hmm.
for literacy, for learning to read. That was one of the punishments. You would get something amputated for learning to read. And if you think about from that moment that was the reality to the moment now where the power just goes up to the state capitol and says, "Thou shalt not teach about oppression or racism or white supremacy or that there are different racial categories at all."
Or
The
equity.
the
Don't use the
or
words.
equity, diversity. Like if you someone church, y'all listening to this, some of y'all that are listening to this, do me a favor. Google outlawed words CRT in Wisconsin and
Mhm.
watch what pops up when you do that. This list of words that the legislature was outlawing to be used in public schools, a list. Social justice is on that list. Like they wanted to outlaw even saying social justice or whatnot. But you should go look at that list. That's what power looks like. That's what violence looks like. That's what thought violence looks like. Cultural violence and political violence looks like. And our kids
Racist
are the target.
gangsterism. Yeah.
Racist gangsterism.
Yeah.
So, anyways, Sharif El Mekki, thank you, brother. This has been
Man,
a
I don't
riveting
know, man.
conversation,
This
though.
this yes. You know what? That scene in Avengers when the Hulk says, well, that's my secret. I'm always angry. Like this is like I yeah, like literally all I mean, the only thing that tempers the rage that you can't help but to feel if you are is the love that you also have for your people and humanity, right? Like that's the
Mhm.
only thing that tempers all that. That's and I think that's how we get our work done because you have to be outraged with this because it is so sickening that human beings, have a mindset to oppress, even if they don't use that word,
Mhm.
other people and other people's children, all of those kind of things. But having love for humanity is like what helps. We talked about balance, right? Like I think that's the only thing that balances this all out and makes us and specifically I'm talking about, us as black men more productive in a society that just does not like tells you in so many bold, glaring words, even if they add sprinkles and glitter on it, that they hate our children, they hate our communities,
Mhm.
and our love for our communities is what, and the outrage, it fuels us. But man, like yeah, it's a lot, man. It's a lot. So
If we had
I
to,
usually leave our conversations pissed off. So again, another, so at least we consistent because I am pissed off, and then I got to go
uh,
see TSA. So then I got to, what I'm saying?
you're gonna get it twice.
Now, yeah, yeah.
I will say to that at the end as we wrap here that redefining what the word woke means and probably redefining it back to what its original mention was, which was that to be conscious.
Mhm.
And I think it was Baldwin who said, to be conscious is to be in rage all the time or something like that.
Yep, yep.
So, making your point, which is if you weren't mad, if you weren't feeling something about everything that we talked about today, there's a good chance that you're asleep.
Mhm.
And your sleep was induced, your state of sleep was probably induced by all of your education and your training that you've had in your life. We've been trained to be in the simulation.
Mhm.
We are simulated humans. We are not living in our full reality. We are not living in a world. The reality of the world is that the global majority is a cultural majority of cultures and colors and a wide spectrum, but the power is not. The wealth is not. And to keep 90% of the planet from understanding that, what I just said, requires a simulation, and that simulation is a program. It's a pedagogical program. It's a facilities program. It is a commerce and funding and per pupil program, and we're living in it. Our favorite movie, The Matrix, talk about it all the time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah. And it's
you know,
crazy now when you see people are like that whole metaverse where they want you to create an
yeah,
alternate and just be it. Like I'm just like, yo, this is nuts. Like
yeah.
just forget about the reality. Just create this
New reality,
avatar.
altered it, yeah,
Yeah, and just live. You're
huh,
happy. That is me. That is real me.
yeah.
Like it's yo, man. Yeah.
I think to be woke in the best sense or in the right way is to be informed, knowledgeable, awake,
Mhm.
and angry where it's appropriate. Right? There's a
Yeah.
level of anger. We have different faith traditions, you and I, but in the Christian faith tradition, Jesus doesn't overturn the money tables because he's happy.
Mhm.
He doesn't do that with people. He doesn't kick people out of the temple because he's, he's in joy,
Flip
in
that
that moment. So it's
table. Flip that
flip the
table.
table, flip the
Listen.
table.
Yeah.
So we need to flip the table, flip the script, and get our kids a nonviolent education. Now, there's a book I'll point people to that is called "This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed."
Mhm.
You should go check out that book. But when I say a nonviolent education, I mean a humane education, an education that they're worthy of by virtue of their birth. They are born with unsurpassable worth granted to them by their creator, and evil forces and powers and principalities in the world will try and take that from them and stop them from having it. You are doing God's work if you are getting in the middle of that and stopping that from happening. If you're the disruptor of that, the interrupter. So,
Yeah. And just for the audience, just before
yeah.
we end, just want to draw this parallel. Like you mentioned a really powerful book. This nonviolent stuff will get you killed. Um, I want to just draw the parallel to that back to education before we end. That
Mm-hmm,
book was written by Charlie Cobb.
mm-hmm,
And as
mm-hmm,
I've mentioned before on the show, a couple years back probably, Charlie Cobb is the man who came up with the concept of freedom schools for children during Freedom Summer. Same
mm-hmm,
man.
mm-hmm.
So think about like he's involved in this protesting, da da da, but he did not stop thinking about what are the violence that children are facing within the schools. He's like, we're working with the parents and grandparents in Mississippi Summer Freedom. What about the children and the violence that they're experiencing within these schools? We need to create something different.
That's so
Um,
crazy. That's a
yeah.
great, and I'm keeping that reference for something I'm writing because I'm stealing that reference as part of something I'm writing. Folks, go look at that book and check out his story because one of the things that I think is that I found really important about his story is how in an era where we were abused and scared a lot of times, he was one of the most feared men in his county, period, by white people and black people alike. So when people like BB King and Little Richard and big name acts or whatnot came to town, he was their protector and their defender. He was the one that made it possible for them to tour, for instance, into places, deeply racist. And by the way, when SNCC and other nonviolent civil rights leaders and others came to town, he was their security. He was the one that protected them. So it was like, y'all can do all that nonviolent stuff if you want to. You're gonna need my protection to do it, but let's make this happen, right? There's something to be said for that in education. So, Sharif, I love your point about this. We probably need some Cobbs, some Mr. Cobbs in education to make it safe for everybody else to do the education they want to do. So I might take that role on. That might be my role. I'm gonna have to get me a Mr. Cobb t-shirt. All right, brother. Have a great week. Appreciate you as always.
You too, man. You too. You too.
Friends and family, if you have any questions or ideas or thoughts about the show, please send me an email, chris@brightbeam.org. Sharif, how can they get in touch with you?
Yep. Twitter is best, or info@thecenterblacked.org. info@thecenterblacked.org.
We
That's
love
the
it
one
as
social
always.
media inbox I'm starting to look at is Twitter. The rest
You
of them
sure
I
are. You
can't.
send me a lot of social media stuff now, so you get
Yeah.
more and more into it.
Yeah.
On Twitter, I'm Citizen Stewart. On Twitter, Sharif is at Selmecki, S-Elmecki, on Twitter. So that's also how you can find us. We love and appreciate y'all for spending this time with us every week. We think communal learning opportunities is the way for us to win. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. But hopefully you are freer than you were when we started this discussion over an hour ago. Thank you all. Please, if you love the show, share